He's truly a Renaissance man, and his work has really touched on each one of these topics in one form or another. I'm going to give short shrift to his bio, and a very impressive and lengthy bio. I'm certainly not going to do it justice because everything that he's done really just sort of like speaks volumes about his character and the kind of person that he is. But here's some of the highlights. He co-founded with his wife Louise schools for abused and learning disabled children. He is also both here and abroad set up hospitals, residential treatment programs, schools, and famine relief programs. He's the the most popular progressive talk radio show host today, and I'm sure many of you listen to his program. And there we go, see? And he's the best-selling author of 20 books in print in over a dozen languages, making him a best-selling New York Times author and the 4-time Project Censored Award winner. As I mentioned today, he's here to talk about unequal protection. He wrote this in 2004 rather presciently, and it's being reissued again this year. Thoughtful, insightful, and hugely readable. It's a wonderful book and just does a really great job of outlining the rise of corporations from the founding of this country to its current state. He has shown that over the years, corporations have really caused a lot of damage ecologically, economically, politically, all because they've been given unfettered discretion in this legal fiction of personhood. And we've seen this most recently, too, the damage that can be done in the political realm when corporations have too much power, too much influence, too much money. Just a couple of months ago, as many of you, I'm sure, know, the Supreme Court issued in Citizens United versus FEC a decision undoing decades' worth of American jurisprudence and congressional acts, stating now that it's okay for corporations to use at no limitation funds from their general treasury to electioneer in the few weeks right before a campaign. And the few weeks right before an election, the time when most Americans really start paying attention to what's going on in politics. Naturally, this is going to have huge ramifications for American democracy. And here to tell us all about it and tell us what we can do and how we can undo the damage of that decision is Mr. Thom Hartmann.
I want to share with you the arc in American history and what has, to a large extent, as a consequence of American history, become world history, the role of corporations in political life and really in all of our lives in so many ways. And first, let's begin at the beginning. Originally, at least for the last 7,000 years up until about 300 years ago, with the singular exception of the 300 or so year experiment of Athens, of Grecian democracy. Other than that, the three dominant forms of governance in the world had been people who were ruled by warlords, kings who just seized power and said, I'm in charge because I'm the biggest guy and whatever. And that became hereditary in very many cases. The second was people who claimed that God had informed them how things should be, or the gods, or variations on gods, or whatever. Theocracies, kingdoms or theocracies. And the third were kingdoms that were informed by theocracies, kingdoms that claimed theocratic rights. I mean, to this day, the coins of England or the United Kingdom have on them a series of letters. I don't remember them right off the top of my head, but something Rex, but basically what it is the Queen rules by the grace of God in Latin. It's the letters that stand for that. And that was the belief, the position, the standing. So for thousands of years, this was the standard. And we decided to try something new in this country. And at the time of the founding of the country, there was a lot of debate about how these things should be done and how things should be organized and what should be put together and who should have rights and what those rights should be. It's very interesting. Even I'm going to talk about the rights of women in a few minutes, and the Iroquois confederacies, these 5, later 6 nations of northeastern New England, mostly New York State and into that area, had for nearly 1,000 years been governed by what they called the Great Law, a constitution. And 34 of their representatives were invited to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 in Philadelphia to first bless the building. They actually smudged the building, and then to be present, to offer their thoughts and advice. They slept there several nights on the 2nd floor. And Ben Franklin introduced them. And when he introduced them, and I'm doing this from memory, but I think I've got it word for word, and by the way, his use of this language was not meant in any kind of derogatory fashion. It was meant in a very, very respectful fashion. This was just the language of the day. He said, as he was introducing them at the opening of the Constitutional Convention, he said, if 5 nations of ignorant savages have been capable of living together in peace for 1,000 years, then certainly 13 colonies of educated Englishmen can do the same. And what he knew about them, and what several of the founders, Jefferson wrote about it at some length in some of his diaries and his personal notes, was that the Iroquois had decided that, well, written into their Great Law, among other things, were essentially three branches of government for all practical purposes. A Supreme Court, in particular, that had the ability to strike down laws, and that only one. And in the Constitution, it said that every decision made had to be made in the context of its impact on the 7th generation. Now, the Iroquois had figured out, after a few centuries, that there was one group among them that was more concerned about the 7th generation than another, and that group was women. And so in 5 of the 6 Iroquois nations, only women could vote. And the men were the sachems, the men who went and traveled the long distances to convey their particular community's concerns to another community and did the annual meetings, but they had no decision-making power. They had to go back, and the women would vote, and then the men would go out and communicate this. And so the founders of our country, all being men, thought, well, that's kind of a cool idea, only one gender voting, but to corporations, we'll get back around to this and the idea. First of all, just a quick story of how I got to this. My wife and I bought a house in Vermont. We sold a business in 1997 and retired, or at least thought we were. And we bought this old house in downtown Montpelier, Vermont, that had been built in 1850. And there was an old carriage house that was too small because it was literally built for carriages. It was too small to be used as a garage, and so nobody had basically gone into it for probably 50 years. The house was a fixer-upper. And so after we bought the house, I was poking around in the upstairs above the carriage house, walking on not quite logs, but the old rough boards that, and trying not to fall through the roof and things, because there were boxes up there, and I wanted to find out what was in them. What I found were these boxes of books, and they were damaged by the weather. None of them had any resale value. But there was a complete collection, 20 volumes, of the collected works of Thomas Jefferson, which have only been published once in the history of the United States. In 1909, by the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Association, and the anniversary of his something or other. I don't know what happened in 1809, but it was a centennial edition, and it was the last year of his presidency, so maybe that was it, or that was the year that Madison took over. But in any case, and having a fair amount of time in my hands, I thought, and I just sat down and started reading. And this was not just his public proclamations and his annual addresses to Congress and all this. This was his personal diaries. One of his most fascinating notes that I found in there was he was talking to. It was a personal note that he made to himself about George Washington,